Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and our conversations with Gibran the prophet. We are now at lecture 5, his passage on children, and there's no question that this is one of the most precious passages for so many readers for so long. The great scholar Jonah Nader makes an observation in a lecture that he gave that you can find on YouTube. We put it in the description of this lecture for you. A presentation that he gave in Australia talking about Gibran and just how brilliant, as genius as he is. And one of the arguments that he makes, and I think it's germane to our comments here, is that Gibran was so far-seeing. I mean, he was way ahead of his time, as all genius must be, and we're certainly going to see this here. Now, we should point out, Gibran himself never had children, and so we've always said, of course, in 303, consider the source of individuals who are speaking who have not had certain experiences. So the fact that Gibran never had children is going to make us look at this passage in one way. However, those of us who have had children will say, wow, this is a passage that has to be considered. And no question, kids or children, you guys, will read this passage differently than your parents, for example. But we've often pointed that out. When I mention, for example, that you guys are going to sit at graduation day, you're such children, I don't mean to insult, but you're such children in this regards. You think about that experience as somehow being about you. It doesn't occur to you that across the track, when the balloons go up and the mascara runs, there will be a whole nother group of folks, namely your parents and those who have raised you and your grandparents, etc., who will have a completely different kind of experience of what graduation day is. For example, there went almost 20 years, come and gone really fast, and oh good heavens, did we do the right thing, etc. Now, no question, this passage is going to build off of previous passages and poems that we've already studied, so we're going to see that right away. And I want to dedicate this lecture specifically to a number of folks who are close to me who just recently have lost parents. And I think it makes sense for us to come to this reading and to this passage with a certain kind of generosity of spirit. Certainly Gibran himself will suggest that we should do that for every one of the poems here. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side, that you have as well found our playlist, that you have as well played around with our intro comments, and then of course we just finished with the On Marriage poem. Now, here we're going to see, this will not shock us, now that we're into this reading, that we're going to see a spiritual view of child rearing, okay? There's not going to be a lot about the practical side of raising children, but more the spiritual, intellectual side of raising children. We should point out that Gibran had an amazing mother, a not so great father who struggled, and the mother was the stability. We're gonna see this as central to his view of good parenting, as stability, a place for stability and growth. The word picture here will be, and I'm just setting it up for you, the bow and arrow, which is a fascinating word picture if you think about it, but it's not one that, of course, Gibran made up on his own. It's, of course, a biblical reference, and you know, we're obviously going to get to it with Psalm 127. We'll start with a woman who has a child. Let's just enjoy the reading. And a woman who held a babe against her bosom said, "Speak to us of children." And he said, "Your children are not your children." So, I mean, let's just pause right away. This is going to be a radical idea. Hey, yeah, parents, those children of yours, they're not yours. They don't actually belong to you. Let's just play this game right away. By the way, I hope you have your own copy of the prophet, and I would recommend that you circle the word "not" in this passage. The power of negation. He, I think, learned a lot of this from his study of Plato, but the power of negation, the way in which he's going to tell us what, in fact, parenting is not so much as what it is, or the word "nor," right? Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. Notice here again, Gibran is constantly reminding us you can't possess anything. Just like you can't go up to a stream or to the swimming pool and grab water. It just doesn't work. And of course, that word picture is prevalent in our study of Lao Tzu's The Tao Te Ching and other classic spiritual texts. The idea that when you look at your children, you must see them in a different light. They are the sons and daughters of, notice capitalized, life's longing for itself. In other words, children are always about what's coming in the future. For example, sometimes people will argue, why should I care about what happens on this planet in 1,000 years? I won't be here. Yes, but the children's children will be as we think forward. So to that degree, we have to always be thinking about life's longing for itself. By the way, some people are hung up with language like life's longing for itself. Like, what does that even mean? Well, it is mystical language, but it's the poetry of Gibran that makes us so tuned in, so attracted to what he has to say. Notice what else he says about children. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. Two observations. Children are not about possession in any sense of the word that we might think about. I possess you, I tell you what to do. It's about legacy. It's about evolution. It's about legacy. We live on through. That is to say, you guys carry inside of you your great-great-great-great-grandma. And though we don't have any pictures of your great-great-great-great-grandma, photographs, if we did, geneticists tell us that your eyes would look a lot like hers or your great-great-great-great-grandpa's face. Very interesting. You carry these people, and in turn, parents have to come to terms with the fact that the children that they have are in fact an extension beyond them, and there is something profound in that insight. He continues to speak to parents. You may give children them your love, but not your thoughts. Now again, I can't tell you how radical this is. For a man born and raised in Lebanon and then came to the United States, to speak this way in the day in which he was speaking it is just mind-blowing. To say to parents, you can't make kids think the way you think, is of course going to be counterintuitive to every sense of traditional orthodoxy that might come into play. And yet this is what he says, and this is why. He says, for children, they have their own thoughts. This is so hard to hear, of course, for all of us as parents and, of course, as grandparents. Note, by the way, the constant messaging of independence. Do you see this? The preciousness of independence. For they have their own thoughts, right? You may house their bodies, but not their souls. For their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. What an amazing idea. In other words, yeah, our job as parents is no question to take care of their physical bodies for children, but it's their souls that we can only provide a certain level of stability for those souls to mature and to grow. He'll say it this way, you may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. It's compelling. It's that joining of that idea in a lot of the religious traditions that the greatest seekers are the ones who are like children because, of course, they have curiosity and a sense of wonder and all of that. He says you want to retain that as parents, but you can't seek to make your children like you because your children are going to live in a world you can't even dream of. You can't even imagine. And to that degree, of course, love releases our children into that future world. And all we can do is, what? Cheer them on to be the stability that allows them to go forward. He says it this way, and here's his argument. And this is kind of his validation for the premise thesis he just shared. For life does not go, notice again all these nods. Life endures. Life does not go backward, nor tarries with yesterday. Well, of course, this is a profoundly spiritual view of children. There's no question, right? He's speaking directly to parents saying, look, you got to see beyond the most mundane of experiences of raising children to what really ultimately matters. And this is why we love the prophet, the text, because Al-Mufasa is going to challenge us to see a different way of looking at all of these ideas, of course, here, children. And now it becomes fascinating, this word picture of the bow and arrow. And some, to be fair, some modern and postmodern readers of this text are a little bit uncertain about a word picture like bows and arrows. First of all, many have never even played around to shoot a bow or arrow, but they understand the concept that you got the bow and you've got the arrow, and somebody, an archer, has to be able to pull back the string of the bow to send the arrow. And of course here we're playing around with a passage from a biblical passage from Psalm 127, 3 through 5. The King James Version reads like this: Behold, children are an inheritance from the Lord. I'm now quoting from Psalm 127. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. Now, here, as we always expect Gibran to do, he'll play with this image, but he'll also expand beyond this image. Watch this. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark. Now here the archer, of course, is the divine parent, that is to say, of course, God. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Of course, this idea of hitting the mark is what the Greeks called hamartia. This is where we actually get our idea of sin from, right? In the Christian tradition, this notion that if you are going to hit the mark, you have to hit at what you look at. And of course, children are the arrows that are sent from the bow. So he finishes, let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, joy. If there's anything I think that parents take away from this reading, it is this idea. Is it hard? Oh, profoundly hard. Harder than anything we'll ever do in our life to have children and to try to help them to grow up to be something other than children. And yet retain that child's spirit, no question. Is it hard? It's profoundly hard. And yet, it has to be perceived by us as the most joy-filled experience of our entire life. I mean, there can't be anything that's more remarkable than this. And of course, some of us will say, well, I will never have children. I mean, we think about Gibran. We think, of course, about the historical Jesus Christ, who maybe probably never had children, right? And we go, well, what's the point if I never have children? Wait. I think that what Gibran would say is that they're all our children, all of them. All the children of the world are our children. You're a parent the moment that you begin to recognize that all of the children are the ones that will ultimately take over this place, right? Take over. They'll run the next. And we as adults have to go bye-bye. I mean, you can only stay at the park swinging for a certain period of time, and then you got to go to the van. We learned that when we were children. Parents, of course, are the ones swinging their children at the park, knowing full well those children someday will be the ones swinging other children at the park. Whether they're biological children or not does not matter to somebody like Gibran. They're all our children. We have to take care of all of them. And of course, this is what I love about hanging out with teachers, because teachers understand this intuitively. All of them are our children. We take care of all of them together. And so he says it, let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness. I love that idea. For even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. It takes both. The idea of the divine parent, of course, God being a divine parent. The idea that you got to have both. You got to have the bow. You also got to have the arrow. And the only way, any of us that have spent any time shooting at all the weapon of archery, we know that this is absolutely true. I'm thinking now at 3A of the classic text Zen in the Art of Archery. It's a wonderful little text by Herschel. And the idea is that in the tradition of Zen and training in Zen to shoot a bow, one of the most important things is to recognize that it's all symbiotic. The arrow, the bow, and the archer, they're all somehow one. They're all playing the same dance. Well, let's finish now at 2A. What is a text like this really saying? Well, I think one of the arguments is the last word. I think that the quest of the parent for Gibran is not possession, but a releasing and yet stability at the same time. And this becomes one of the central difficulties of understanding this passage. We can't just allow children to do anything they want, because if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up somewhere else. If you don't have a real clear idea of the mark, you're never going to be able to shoot the arrow well. So you've got to have a sense of where you're headed. But it can't be understood as, you got to do it exactly as I do it. That's that stability piece, and I think Gibran would probably say his mother was a classic exemplar of that. At 2B, Think about the power of the bow and arrow word picture. It's a wonderful, I think it's a wonderful word picture. At 3a, we mentioned, of course, Psalm 127, 3 through 5. I want to go back to our study of those three classic texts, those precious texts, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid. And if you want to, you can go back to learnstrong.net and find my comments there. You'll remember that in each one of those, I pointed out that these are fundamentally texts about parenting, about parents and children. I mean, think about the power of the opening line of the Iliad, "Sing, O God, as the rage of Achilles, Peleus' son." Wow, so right away we're reminded that it's about a father and a son. Achilles has a father, right? We think about, of course, Odysseus and Telemachus, and Odysseus returns, and what kind of a father is he to Telemachus? And of course, then it hits us as we comment in those lectures. Wait a minute, all those bad guys that they end up having to slaughter because they're such bad guys, wait a minute, where are all those guys' fathers? Well, many of them left with Odysseus to go to Troy, and Odysseus never brought him back home. Of course, the Odyssey and Odysseus wanting to argue it wasn't my fault, or Zeus, it wasn't my fault. They made their choices, but be that as it may, the children were affected by that with the lack of what? Stability. And of course, we know about the great classic text of the Aeneid, and of course the relationship with the father and the son, and of course carrying the father over your shoulder if you're Aeneas taking his daddy to the boat. At 3b, finally, what are your thoughts on this if you're a parent? How hard is this vision of raising children as parents? And I would say, Gibran can lead readers to feel a sense of maybe not necessarily guilt or shame, but lesser than. Man, I wish I could do this better as a parent. And yet I would say that what Gibran, this is why I mentioned the use of grace, you've got to read these poems with a sense of grace, a sense of forgiveness, both for yourself and obviously for maybe parents in your life who didn't do it as well as you would have liked to have had it done. What about this as a vision for you guys as kids? I won't call you children, but as kids, to be able to think about what will it be like at the moment that you begin to realize that they're all our children. I remember a senior saying, you know, I had a lot of disrespect for my parents, and then they left for a week, and I had to take care of my little brother. And it drove me nuts because I told him to do something, he wouldn't do it. And then the question was, well, what do I do? And then I realized, well, I can scream and yell and use force, or I can try to find some capacity to love and to guide. And then all of a sudden it hit me. My parents have been doing this to me for a really long time, and all of a sudden I had a completely different view of parenting. You got it. Well, it's not a shock to us that this view that he has will also be his view of teaching. It'll be his view of, for example, political tendencies in terms of administration and the like. We'll see it. From here, interestingly, we move, and it makes total sense. If you've been kind of following with our lectures, it makes total sense that now we move on to a precious passage on giving, one of the great passages in all of Gibran's prophet. I hope that this stuff is challenging you as much as it is me. Thank you.